Your questions and comments about God and religion. Should be fun.
Oh, this will be a hoot.
Hello everyone, I'm Professor Plank. I respond to various theological and ideological questions and claims from a rationalistic and naturalistic approach in an effort to give and explain the opposite viewpoint and help to balance the conversation. Today we're checking back in with our favorite Franciscan friar, Father Casey Cole. And he's going to be attempting to answer questions about God and religion, specifically ones coming from atheists and general non-believers. Now, as a counter-apologist, I've been asking a variety of questions of religious apologists for many years now on all sorts of topics related to their worldviews and theology. Questions about the nature of the universe, about morality and ethics, about epistemology and the validity of beliefs. Questions of science, science and progress. Don't speak as loud as my heart.
Nobody said it was easy.
And one thing that has been a constant about the whole process, none of their answers have ever even come close to being satisfactory. The main problem I kept running into again and again was that their answers were always so laden with fallacies that I could scarcely believe that a genuine thinking person could say them with a straight face. But not only were those theistic replies given with a straight face, but they were expressed with total confidence and what looked like a smug, self-assured smile that displayed total confidence that they just thoroughly had dunked on all non-belief and any hint of an idea that they might be wrong. At the time, I tried to remind myself that, well, perhaps they just didn't realize how full of logical holes all of their responses were. After all, I am a communication professor, and dissecting arguments, rhetorical criticism, and being cognizant of logical fallacies is a big part of what I do for a living. So perhaps, I thought, I've just got a more trained eye for this sort of thing. So maybe it's not their fault that they can't see the blatant and glaring logical plot holes that they're driving into. But no matter how many times I would try to walk them through exactly where they were going wrong, their eyes would just roll and they would just jump back to insisting that I was an obstinate, angry atheist, mad at God and my unrighteousness, and that's why I was trying to poke holes in everything they were saying, rather than recognizing the rock-solid logic and truth of their answers. A big part of my coming to terms with my atheism and how apologetics reacts to non-belief was recognizing that religious belief is foundationally built on a stubborn desire to believe that is so strong that it blinds a person's ability to use rationality, at least where their faith is concerned, because it's amazing how logical and reasonable people of faith can be in every other facet of their lives, but then they just turn all that off when it comes to religion. But maybe I'm jumping the gun on Father Casey here today. Maybe he is, in fact, bringing the goods and logical reasoning to these forthcoming questions from atheists. Perhaps he really will answer these queries in such a way that we're all going to be firm Catholic believers by the end of it. So let's give him the floor and hear some of his responses to these non-believers' questions. But before we get to that, if you end up liking what you see in this video and would like to help out the channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you'll always be notified when new content comes out. Check out my social media, including my Patreon, Twitter, and Blue Sky, all linked in the description. And of course, like this video, pop in a comment. All that goes a long way towards pleasing the YouTube algorithm, liberating through lucid logical learning, letting light locate long-lost Luddites, leaving limiting luminous lords languishing, and living lives of logic and love may keep my channel motoring along. Now on to today's video.
Do you have to be religious to live a good life? No, not at all. Christianity believes in something called natural theology, that truth, beauty, and goodness can be found all around us in nature, speaking to us and guiding our consciences. There's something inherent in our world that tells us that murder is bad and generosity is good. You don't need the church for that.
Starting off with a nice point of agreement, so I'm glad to see that. Absolutely, one does not need to be religious in order to lead a good life and be a good person. But I will take exception to one thing Casey said here. When he said that there's something inherent in our world that tells us that murder is bad and generosity is good. I wouldn't say that that is inherent in our world. Notions of good and bad don't come from the world. They aren't inherent natural aspects of reality or the world around us. They come from us. Morality in general comes from us, and it comes by way of evolutionary psychology. I mean, say you have two tribes of struggling ancient humans living in neighboring caves. Now, one tribe develops a psychological tendency to steal whatever they can from one another in order to make their own individual lives better. After all, the more possessions you have, the more value you have via all of your cool stuff. And this tribe holds this mentality so strongly that they consider it totally acceptable, even hold it as a good thing, to kill those around them if they can gain some benefit from doing so. So this tribe runs around killing each other with reckless abandon and taking whatever they can from one another, thus turning each member of that tribe into an enemy of all the others. Even when they aren't killing each other, they look at one another with suspicion and paranoia. Fairly soon, that tribe is decimated by all the in-group hate and killing until there's none left. Then, look at the second tribe. Now, they develop a psychological tendency to cooperate with each other toward common goals. They respect each other's right to live and to exist as a part of the group. To aid in that perspective, they develop deep empathy and care towards each other, wanting the best for one another. And so, not only not doing harm to one another, but giving of themselves to benefit those who are struggling, helping one another. And thereby, the entirety of the tribe is protected from harm, aided in their efforts to carry out tasks, and cared for when falling on hard times. The second tribe thrives and grows and procreates and evolves into a thriving society that spans many generations, all carrying on those same psychological tendencies towards feeling that murder is wrong and generosity is good. This is natural selection at work. The traits that are not conducive towards survival and flourishing are weeded out of a population naturally through death, while the ones that do foster success and well-being propagate further. This isn't some magical, inherent aspect of the world that we inhabit. It's the evolutionary byproduct that made a weak, hairless ape rise above all the other creatures around them that were stronger and more hardy to become the dominant species on the planet today.
How can you trust a book written thousands of years ago and filled with contradictions? I think a lot of people's problems with the Bible could be solved with a slightly different approach. Rather than viewing it as the dictated word of God that fell down from heaven, which it most certainly isn't, what if we read it as a collection of what God's people have said about God over time, inspired by real events and guided by a living and true God, so containing truth beyond human reason, but undeniably human in composition?
But why would it? I mean, particularly the part where you claim that it was inspired by real events and guided by the hand of a living God. Why would I do any of that? Why would I assume any of that? Given that many of the parts that are supposed to be recounting some of these real events, we know to be false. Like the global flood. It didn't happen. There are civilizations that existed right through the time that the supposed global flood would have happened and didn't seem to say anything about any kind of flood. Not to mention the little sticking point of still being around after they were supposedly wiped out. They existed before the flood and they continued to exist after it. So they clearly didn't get wiped out. Cultures like Egypt, the early dynastic period, and the Old Kingdom, the pyramid builders, including the 4th, 5th, and 6th dynasties. They were major, powerful, and well-documented civilizations that existed without interruption throughout this time period. There were the early phases of the Harappan civilization in South Asia. The Sumerian and Akkadian civilizations were flourishing during and before the time of the supposed flood, and have a well-understood historical progression that doesn't include suddenly being wiped out by a flood. Also, there's the little genetic sticking point of the idea of the entire human population of today being the result of the incest of Noah and his family, and there just not being enough genetic diversity between the less than 10 mostly related people who would have remained to repopulate the entire planet. So that's one thing from the Bible we know didn't happen. Adam and Eve being the first humans created from magic in the Garden of Eden, that didn't happen. We've mapped the human genome, we've discovered our evolutionary ancestors, and know how non-human ape ancestors evolved into the Homo sapiens of today. And we know it happened over a period of hundreds of thousands of years, not all at once in a garden. Also, Moses parting the Red Sea so the Jews could escape from Egypt. Didn't happen. No archaeological evidence of any such exodus has ever been uncovered. I mean, I'm fine with the idea of the Bible being a collection of made-up stories, a work of fiction containing some historical events and some real places, not unlike Spider-Man hanging out in New York City and responding to 9/11. I'm fine with the Holy Book being a collection of parables meant to impart lessons, no different from the tortoise and the hare imparting the idea that slow and steady wins the race. But why should I think for a second that any of the supernatural stories of the Bible actually happened, or that there's any kind of a God directing any of it? It seems much more reasonable that it's all a bunch of myths and legends that grew and spread the way all superstitious practices and beliefs do, through a combination of fear of the unknown and a desire to come up with any fanciful answer that will quash that fear, the powerful attempting to remain in power by claiming divine authority, and here's what God told us to tell you to keep you faithful and subservient to us, and the general desire to believe in order to deal with the rigors and injustices of life and convince oneself that all scales will be balanced after death by an all-powerful and all-loving being who will reward the righteous and punish the wicked. In other words, a lot of wishful thinking and manipulation by the powerful. That seems a much more reasonable way of looking at not just your, but every holy book.
My biggest problem with Christianity is the Christians. Hypocrites that spread hatred. But surely we can't believe that the people who do these things or act in this way are really disciples of Jesus, can we? The problem we see isn't with Christians, it's with people claiming to be Christians that know nothing of Christ. Just a fallacy!
That would be a no true Scotsman fallacy. When a universal, all, every, etc. claim is refuted, rather than conceding the point or meaningfully revisiting the claim is altered by going from universal to specific and failing to give any objective criteria for the specificity. No Scotsman would put sugar on their porridge. Well, look there. There's Angus, born and raised Scotsman, putting sugar on his porridge. Well, then Angus must not be a real Scotsman, because no true Scotsman puts sugar on their porridge. Similarly, they aren't real Christians if they aren't acting and behaving precisely the way that I determine that they should be. Well, sorry, Casey, but you just can't use that kind of reasoning, specifically when it comes to Christian religion in all of its different forms and denominations. I mean, as a Catholic priest, the entirety of Protestantism doesn't consider you to be a true Christian, and they outnumber you more than 2-1. And seriously, there are passages in the Bible that can allow self-proclaimed Christians of any stripe to insist that they are the ones truly in keeping with its teachings, and God's true will, and Jesus' real desire for his followers. I mean, the KKK looked at all of the passages about endorsing slavery to justify their bigotry towards any non-whites, up to and including New Testament passages that reinforce the idea. Any manner of Christians pushing religious persecution towards non-Christians can point to the differing rules that existed in the Bible for Hebrew citizens, i.e. followers of the one true God, and non-Hebrews who had much less rights and privileges. They can look to that as justification for their desire to oppress religious minorities. Prosperity gospel preachers insist that poverty is a punishment God is levying upon the unrighteous as a reason for not helping the poor or giving to charity. Because if you do so, you're trying to offset God's will and his just punishment. You don't get to decide who the real Christians are, Casey, just because you can point to one Bible verse about Jesus saying, "Love thy neighbor," and declare anyone who doesn't follow it to be a real follower of Christ. Not when the violent jackholes can point to another passage where God sent bears to maul a bunch of kids for making fun of someone's bald head as a justification for beating up anyone who offends them.
It just seems to me that gods were an invention of ancient people to explain things they didn't understand. We know how the world works now. Why keep this silly belief? Well, I understand where this question comes from. I think it's a bit condescending to our ancestors. Sure, we've made huge strides in science and technology, but do we really think that we have continued to progress in every area of knowledge?
Yes.
I'm not so sure that our art is as good as it's ever been. Our poetry, our family structures, relationship with the natural world, sense of morality, awe and wonder.
Well, for starters, that's different from what you were asked. And that answer obfuscates from the actual question. You asked, do we really think we've continued to progress in every area of knowledge? And then you went on to talk about art and poetry and morality and family structure and how connected we are to the natural world. Well, these things are not what I or most people would classify as knowledge. Art is not knowledge. It's an expression of creativity and is more centered on feelings and emotions than it is on what or how we know things. And to some of those things you mentioned, I would absolutely say that we have progressed in our understanding of them. Like the natural world, for instance. Our ancestors knew very little about things like climate change and how pollution affects nature, nor did they even really care that much about it either. They were kind of like, throw whatever rubbish you have wherever you like. There's bigger concerns to deal with. After all, God's in control and will fix any problems with the world anyway. Which is a view that many an evangelical Christian maintains to this day, which is one of the major reasons that they often dismiss climate change rhetoric as a hoax. Because after all, God's in control of the planet and he wouldn't let global warming actually happen. Or you mentioned family structure. Well, back in ancient times, you'd get literally put to death for being gay. Nowadays, a family can have 2 dads or 2 moms, or any combination thereof, including more than just 2 parents. Blended families, single-parent families, interracial or multi-ethnic families, who once upon a time would have been run out of town on a rail for daring to intermingle rather than keeping to their own kind. Let's not act like what could be considered viable family units were so much better several hundred years ago, when wives were little more than chattel slaves to their male oppressors. Yes, I would say every area of life that is actually classifiable as knowledge has vastly improved over our ancestors. And I would also say that our culture in general has progressed significantly as well. The only areas where it hasn't are places where antiquated adherence to religious fundamentalism still holds sway and refusing to let cultural progression bring them into the 21st century. Yeah, but also, this answer is completely unsatisfactory because it dodges the initial question, which was questioning why we should take the unverified word about supernatural occurrences and notions of God from ancient people who lacked the understanding of the world around them, enough to recognize that things that were happening might not have been actual supernatural occurrences. And your answer to that is, well, they made some damn good art though, didn't they? Hey, have you read that poem from back in the day? Look, I'm not dissing ancient people. They were a product of their time. But many of these people thought that the sun was a literal eye of God watching them from the sky. And they thought that because they didn't have the scientific capability of understanding that it was, in fact, a giant ball of plasma undergoing nuclear fusion 93 million miles away. Now, why the hell should we take their word on God existing just because they made some pretty paintings?
Stupid! You're so stupid!
How can you believe in God without any evidence? For most agnostic people, this is the biggest hang-up with religion. There's no empirical proof. And that's correct. But there is more to truth than what we can see and can measure. Beauty, goodness, love, inspiration. These things can't be quantified or proven beyond a doubt, and even if we could pinpoint the neurons and brain chemistry that help us experience these things, do you really think that they would be sufficient to explain what they mean to us?
Yes.
We do know everything about how our brains create what we experience as love and emotion and our experience of beauty and the like. Neurochemically, it's a complex process of hormonal releases and the corresponding effects that they have on our brain that we experience as different emotional states. For instance, when you fall in love with someone, there's a number of things that happen, like a release of dopamine, which is a feel-good neurotransmitter. It surges in the ventral tegmental area, the brain's main reward center. This creates the intense feeling of euphoria, focused attention on the loved one, and powerful motivation to be with them. There's also norepinephrine, or noradrenaline, a stress hormone that triggers the physical symptoms of infatuation, such as a racing heart, sweaty palms, and a rush of energy, the butterflies in your stomach. Then there's a big one, oxytocin. Released in large amounts during physical intimacy, oxytocin plays a critical role in deepening emotional bonds, promoting feelings of contentment, trust, and security, and facilitating long-term monogamous pair bonding. There's also endorphins. Released over time, these opioids contribute to a general feeling of calmness, comfort, and well-being associated with being with a long-term partner and act as the body's natural painkillers. The fact that this all may seem like science-y gobbledygook to you and couldn't possibly be all that there is to the oh-so-magical seeming experience of love, that doesn't really matter. Yes, it seems profound to you, because you experience things with your brain. Literally every experience, every feeling, every concept, every perception you ever have happens in your brain. So when your brain is being bombarded by these reactions that are causing it to respond in intense and impactful ways, well, of course it's going to seem profound to you. It's literally the most profound kind of experience that we are capable of having at all. But the fact that you're experiencing it as intense and meaningful and profound doesn't mean that it's magical or ethereal or supernatural. The fact that it's basic neurochemistry does not mean that it isn't important or that it's not meaningful in some way. It just means that it's not magic. Your emotions aren't magic. Love isn't magic. Recognizing what strikes you as beautiful isn't magic. Your experience of them is not magic. It just feels that way to you because of how intense it feels. But again, feels are all in your brain. So of course intense reactions in your brain feel like there's something more. But they aren't. And if that is your entire reasoning for why you think it's rational that we can believe in a God without any evidence, well...
Let it go and accept the truth that we is dumb. Dumb as hell.
Why doesn't God reveal himself to everyone? Yes, this is the follow-up question to that. At least there could be some proof, you say. Why couldn't God pop out of the sky every so often and say something? Wouldn't that make things a lot easier? I think there are three things to say here. One, he did. At least according to the witnesses of Scripture, to the stories of people who had visions, to the example of Jesus himself.
There were no witnesses in the Bible. What there were biblical authors writing stories about supposed witnesses to things that they themselves never saw, and only were writing down what they heard from someone who heard it from someone who heard it from someone else, that something like that happened dozens or even hundreds of years ago. You said people had visions? What, you mean like the guy who just recently had a vision that the rapture was going to happen last week? What happened with that? Oops! Guess that vision wasn't a real vision. It was just a dream or a hallucination. But trust me, there are some real visions out there, right? As were the supposed visions of just about anybody who ever had them at any point in history. Jesus said and Jesus did this, that, or the other, you say? Well, what? According to the Bible? Which we've already covered in depth, why no stock should be put into that. I mean, come on. Your first point is crap, Casey, so strike one.
Number two, when would it stop? Would Jesus have to be born, die, and rise again in every age to every people for us to believe? It seems pretty impractical to say the least.
Why? I mean, I'm not leaning on Jesus coming back again and again in every age. That wasn't even the question. The question wasn't about Jesus. It was about God. Why doesn't God prove himself to everyone? And this should be a rather trivially easy thing for a supposed all-powerful being to do. It would be absurdly easy for a being with all knowledge to know exactly what would convince each and every person who ever lives of his existence, and for a being with all power to provide whatever it would take to convince each and every person of his existence. Even counters to claims like this that would be something like, oh, well, that would eliminate faith or mess with your free will, well, these fall flat. Because it doesn't change free will one bit to provide evidence that would convince people of the truth of something. And as far as eliminating faith goes, what, so God didn't mind eliminating the faith of all of those people that he proved himself to with all of those supernatural events and undeniable acts of God from Scripture? What, Moses' faith didn't matter? Show up as a burning bush and talk to him directly, because what does his faith matter? What about all those people you just claimed had visions of God and it completely convinced them what, their faith didn't matter? Why do I need to take God on faith, but other people get God speaking directly to them in a voice that only they can hear? Why would he reach down his mighty hands and part the sea in full view of hundreds of people in an undeniable display of divine power so that one group of oppressed people could escape their tormentors? But then today, a Scud missile can blow up a school and kill countless of children as part of a genocidal ethnic cleansing, but I guess God's out to lunch about it. How practical is God proving himself to each and every person, you ask? It's completely practical. If three things: he was A, fair, B, truly wanted everyone to know he exists, and of course, C, he actually existed. The fact that he doesn't ever do this and doesn't prove himself to everyone means he isn't at least one of those three things. I'm banking on C. So 2 crap points there, Casey. Strike 2.
And 3, where would that leave faith? If God were someone who could just be measured and tested, then we would be left with no choice but to believe. Gravity exists whether we believe it or not. But this is not how faith works, and there is something critically important about having to trust and to take a leap of faith.
Mighty Casey has struck out.
I guess I anticipated this point was coming and blew it out of the water already. Yeah, faith isn't a shield for the absence of God when God had no problem making himself present and visible and evident all over the place in the past, vis-a-vis the Bible. If it didn't violate their faith back then, it wouldn't violate our faith now. And if God changed his mind and only nowadays insists on blind faith when he didn't care so much about it back then that means God isn't unchanging. And he isn't all-knowing and actually can change his mind and recognize mistakes in his past. All of which Christianity, and especially Catholicism, always told me weren't part of God's holy nature. So, strike 3. Crap points all around on why God can't show himself to each and every person. How about a better explanation, such as, he doesn't exist?
You do know that there's no evidence that Jesus even existed, right? Technically, this is true. Not only is there no video, photographic, or DNA evidence of a man named Jesus in the 1st century, there's no archaeological record Christians can point to as undeniable proof. But then again, neither is there any such evidence for someone like Genghis Khan or most people in the ancient world.
A 2003 study did provide genetic evidence for Genghis Khan. We have identified a Y chromosomal lineage with several unusual features. It was found in 16 populations throughout a large region of Asia, stretching from the Pacific to the Caspian Sea, and was present in high frequency. 8% of the men in this region carry it, and it thus makes up 0.5% of the world total. The pattern of variation within the lineage suggests that it originated in Mongolia 1,000 years ago. Such a rapid spread cannot have occurred by chance. It must have been a result of selection. The lineage is carried by likely male-line descendants of Genghis Khan, and we therefore propose that it has spread by a novel form of social selection resulting from their behavior. There's also ample archaeological and historical evidence for Genghis Khan's existence. So it's not just stories about him doing magic in one single religious text, like a certain other person we're talking about.
What we have are first-hand witness accounts, stories, and a world clearly turned upside down by his presence,
In other words, stories of him doing magic in one religious text. And then a lot of people believing in those stories and a world being turned upside down by the presence of those stories and their belief in them.
Why Christianity over other religions? This is as much a personal question for me as it is a theological one. Christianity is unique in its theology of the Trinity and incarnation.
Every religion is unique in some aspect or other. What, Christianity has the Trinity? Okay, Hinduism has karma. Christianity has the incarnation? Well, Buddhism has attainable enlightenment. Norse theism has the killing of frost giants. I don't see that in the Bible. Greek pantheism has hydras and three-headed dogs guarding the underworld. Every theology is different from every other theology in some way. Pointing out aspects that are somewhat unique to your belief in no way indicates that any of them are more likely to be true or to any degree superior to any other.
How can you believe in a God who condemns a good person to hell just because they were of the wrong religion? I don't. If a Muslim, Jew, or Buddhist comes face to face with God upon their death and says, "Yes, this is exactly what I was seeking in my religion, I just didn't know what I was missing," there is not a doubt in me that God will welcome them into himself.
And you call yourself a Christian?
The only people who will be outside of hell in eternity are Christians.
You see, the Christian is the only person, the true Christian, who can say that they're going to heaven without being self-righteous.
According to the Bible, more people are going to hell than to heaven. Because there are many ways to go to hell, but there's only one way to go to heaven. Being a good person and doing good deeds won't get you into heaven, but Jesus Christ is the only way to heaven.
Why does God allow suffering? This is the quintessential question, right? People have asked this for thousands of years with thousands of different responses. Obviously, free will plays a big part in this, and if someone chooses bad things that have inevitable consequences, people are going to get hurt. But I don't think that that really gets at the heart of the question, because God could still intervene, but doesn't always. And the reason, I believe, is because suffering is not always bad or without merit.
This is a common religious answer to the problem of evil, or expressed in this question as suffering. The idea that there is some greater good to be achieved via suffering. Hey, the good Lord gave us mountains so we could learn how to climb, and all that jazz. This is a wholly unsatisfactory answer to the problem of suffering, and is more than anything just an easy rejoinder to allow the theist to hand-wave away the problem and act as if they've addressed it when they really haven't. For one, an all-powerful God who made us, as well as the earth and everything in it, could have made us in such a way that we didn't need to experience suffering in order to learn things from it. We wouldn't need mountains to learn how to climb. He could have just made us knowing how to climb from the start. Much the same way that we didn't have to learn how to breathe or how to eat. Or just not give us those obstacles to have to deal with in the first place. Suffering wouldn't be needed to teach lessons that we had no need to learn if we didn't need to learn those lessons. Oh, you say childhood leukemia is necessary in order for us to learn how to overcome illnesses like leukemia? Well, if there was no such thing as childhood leukemia, we wouldn't have to learn how to cure childhood leukemia. And then all of those kids who suffered and died wouldn't have had to have. But then they'll often retort with, well, actually, all suffering only entered the world because of the original sin of Adam and Eve, and it wasn't actually God's doing. And that argument falls apart for a number of reasons. For one, as previously gone over, there were no Adam and Eve. There was no original sin. We already know that for a proven fact that that's not how humanity arrived on this planet. It's just a religious parable, not something that actually happened. And for two, let's say it did. The original sin of Adam and Eve were orchestrated by God. He put the tree with the forbidden fruit in the garden where it could easily be gotten to. He created Adam and Eve with no knowledge of good and evil, thus not even being able to know that it would be wrong to disobey, because they didn't know what wrong was. He created the serpent that would tempt Adam and Eve. He supposedly is all-knowing with perfect knowledge of the future, so he would have known exactly what was going to happen when he did all this stuff. It was all his doing, by his design, according to his will. To claim otherwise, even within the context of this entirely fictional story, is obtuse excuse-making from a clearly capricious God who knew what was up every step of the way, and everything played out exactly as he set it up to. But then he turns around and blames his victims for doing the very thing he dog-walked them into doing in the first place. It's the ultimate and original gaslighting. And, of course, the original sin thing is BS because the sins of the Father is not supposed to be enacted upon the Son, as is laid out in Christian's own holy book. But the entire idea of original sin and the actions of Adam and Eve allowing sin to come into the world and cause untold suffering for the rest of time, it's predicated on the idea of the sins of the original humans resulting in the suffering of all of their progeny to come. It's all bullshit and a horribly invalid attempt at waving away the general problem of suffering. This answer isn't a real answer. It's a dodge, plain and simple.
I just can't accept an organization that is homophobic. There's nothing inherently homophobic about Christianity in general or the Catholic Church in particular.
Leviticus 18:22. Do not have sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman. That is detestable. Leviticus 20:13. If a man has sexual relations with a man as one does with a woman, both of them have done what is detestable. They are to be put to death. Their blood will be on their own heads. Romans 1:26. Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. 1 Corinthians 6:9. Or do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Neither the sexually immoral, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor men who have sex with men. 1 Timothy 1:9. We also know that the law is made not for the righteous, but for the lawbreakers and rebels, the ungodly and sinful, the unholy and irreligious, for those who kill their fathers or mothers, for murderers, for the sexually immoral, for those practicing homosexuality, for slave traders and liars and perjurers, and for whatever else is contrary to the sound doctrine. Don't piss on my leg and tell me it's raining, Casey. Christianity is absolutely opposed to homosexuality, and it is inherently homophobic.
And lastly, I tried praying, but didn't hear anything. Well, join the club. I say this not to dismiss your comment, but to calm you. This is the way that God works. The Bible often notes that God speaks through whispers. The mystics claim that God's language is silence.
You know what else has a language that is silence? Silence. You know when else you might not hear any voice? When no one is speaking. You're trying to reassure us that just because we don't hear God's voice, that doesn't mean that God isn't speaking. Well, I don't need reassurance that God really is. I want a reason why I should think he's speaking in the first place. I mean, more than anything you've said thus far, Casey, this just strikes me as pure copium. This is the utmost in desperate self-soothing. This is, I want to believe so bad that I'm going to tell myself that God is talking to me, even though I have no reason to think that he is. And you should all believe it too, based on nothing substantial, because the more of you that all believe it, the more resolve I'll have that it's okay for me to keep believing it too. In a real, how can so many people who believe in God all be wrong kind of a mindset. Well, sorry, Casey, but there is in fact a much more likely and very apt reason why neither the questioner, nor me, nor even you, by your own admission, hear the voice of God. Because there's no God to hear from to begin with.
For those who have yet to experience this, it may sound like utter nonsense, and I get it. But if you've made it this far into this video, there must be something speaking to you deep down.
Yes, there is in fact something deep down inside me. There's a need to expose fallacious reasoning, wishful thinking, theocratic indoctrination, oppressive antiquated superstition and mysticism, and outright self-deception that keeps people intellectually and emotionally stunted. looking in all the wrong places for meaning and purpose, and insistent on ethereal truths about life and reality that keep them blind to actual truths about life and reality. I also have a need to lay bare the dogma that speaks to the inherent biases, prejudices, and fears that make people think that they're okay to maintain their bigotry and it's righteous to impose them on others. I also like dispelling rituals that convince people that they're doing something worthwhile when they're actually wasting precious time and the one and only life they'll ever get to have. And I enjoy showcasing the blatant falsities that people are building their entire lives around in ways that cock up everything for everybody, including themselves. That's what's speaking to me deep down, Casey, not your imaginary friend. So that was Father Casey Cole and his attempt at answering atheistic questions posed to him by some of his viewers. And like I said at the outset, there was a lot of obfuscation and diverting from the point of the questions to meander off into talking about something else in order to avoid those uncomfortable questions. Like we had with the real problem of suffering that can't be sufficiently answered by just claiming that it's all for some kind of nebulous greater good. Or distracting from a question about taking the word of ancient people who are ignorant of modern science by just saying, hey, they made some really good art though. We had some common anti-science appeals that often come from Christians, like that love must be something magical because it can't possibly be just something going on in your brain, when it absolutely can and is. Or claims that there's no proof of any ancient people, so why should we require proof for Jesus when the entire field of history or anthropology would laugh their collective balls off at that assertion? The only surprising thing was how many of his answers would get him downright excommunicated from most of the Christian denominations. Like that Christianity isn't against homosexuality, or that all religions can go to heaven and it's not exclusively for Christians. Hell, go back a few hundred years ago and saying that sort of thing publicly would have gotten Father Casey burnt at the stake for heresy. Yet, not only does he say those things, but then he has the gall to say that other denominations who say differently aren't true Christians, and that only his specific concept of what Jesus would want and what Jesus taught count as true Christianity. Frankly, I don't know how he can make such claims and retain his position as a Catholic priest. I mean, I grew up a Catholic, and it was absolutely imposed upon me in no uncertain terms that anyone who wasn't a proper and true Catholic Christian would burn forever in the lake of fire, regardless of how decent of a person they were. But at the end of the day, there wasn't much of substance in regards to any reasons why we atheists should change our minds and agree with Father Casey's theology. It seemed to boil down to just things like, trust it's all true without evidence. Believe in things science has conclusively disproven. Believe in the magical nature of stuff that science has proven to be non-magical. Believe God is speaking to you when you can't hear him. Believe God has good reasons for not proving himself to you, even though he's apparently been more than willing to prove himself to countless others throughout history. Believe the Bible is true despite all the stuff that it provably gets wrong, and believe that Christianity is the way to go, even though any other particular way you go will apparently get you to the same destination. And why believe and trust in all of this stuff?
Be a lot cooler if you did.
Well, sorry, Casey, but that's going to be a big, colossal, monumental no from me. And so that is where we'll end things for today. So thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like this video, comment, and subscribe so you'll always be notified when a new video comes out. Check me out on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Patreon if you'd like to support my work directly. My Teespring if you want some Plinky merchandise. All that linked below in the description. Special shout out to my most recent super thankers here on YouTube, Salvi Mike, Autumnal Fling, Michael Martin, and Midian767. And with that said, until next time, I'm Professor Plank reminding you to keep striving for greater understanding. It's the best way to get wherever you want to go.